The rain hits hard tonight. Michael checks his mirror. Emily's asleep in the back seat, curled up under her little jacket like she always is on his late shifts. No babysitter, no family. Just the two of them, like always. Then, a girl, out of nowhere, throwing herself in front of his car. He brakes hard. She slams both hands against his window, eyes wide, voice cracking. "Please, just drive." Two black SUVs roll out of the dark behind her. No plates, no lights, moving like they've done this before. Emily stirs awake. She doesn't scream. She just looks at the girl, then looks at him. "Daddy, she's scared." Michael's jaw tightens. He knows he should say no. He knows what getting involved costs. He learned that lesson 4 years ago, the hard way. He unlocks the door. What he didn't know was that the girl in his back seat wasn't running from danger. She was carrying it. The city looks different at 11 p.m. Most people see it from the inside, through restaurant windows, through the warm glow of apartment lights, through the screens they stare at until their eyes give out. But Michael sees it the way only a few people ever do. From the outside, moving through it, watching it breathe. 4 years of night shifts will do that to you. He merged onto the main road, both hands on the wheel, eyes already scanning 3 cars ahead the way they always did, automatically, quietly, like a habit he couldn't turn off even if he tried. The rain had started an hour ago. Light at first, now steady. The kind that made everything on the road look like it was melting. In the back seat, Emily slept. She was 7 years old and already an expert at sleeping in cars. Arms folded under her cheek, knees pulled up. Her little blue jacket draped over her shoulders like a blanket. She'd been doing this since she was 3, riding with him on the nights he had no other option, which lately had become most nights. She never complained, never asked why they didn't have someone to stay home with her like her classmates did. She just climbed in, buckled up, and was asleep before he hit the second traffic light. Michael glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Something in his chest did the thing it always did when he looked at her for too long. Tightened, then loosened, then settled into something that wasn't quite peace, but was the closest thing he had to it. He looked back at the road. The notification on his dashboard pinged. New ride request. 2.4 miles away. He accepted it without thinking and turned left. It had been a quiet night up until then, which was the kind of night he preferred. 3 rides. A couple coming back from dinner, too tired to talk. A college kid who fell asleep in the back and almost left his laptop. An older woman who asked him if the rain was supposed to stop and nodded slowly when he said he didn't know, like she'd expected that answer. No complications. No moments. Just the road and the rain, and Emily breathing softly in the back. His phone had been silent all day except for one message from Emily's school, a reminder about Picture Day on Thursday. He'd read it 3 times. He still hadn't figured out where he put her good jacket. The blue one didn't count. She wore it every day. He needed to find the gray one, the one with the small buttons she liked to fidget with. That was the kind of problem Michael preferred to have. Small, solvable, contained. 2 rides later, he was stopped at a light when the question came. Emily had shifted in her sleep, but not fully woken. That half-conscious state she sometimes drifted into where she'd murmur something and then drop back under. But tonight, she surfaced completely, blinking at the ceiling of the car with the slow, unbothered confusion of a child who never quite understood why the world kept moving while she was trying to rest. She looked at the back of his head. "Daddy." "Hey, go back to sleep." "I'm not tired anymore." She sat up, rubbing one eye with her fist. "Daddy, What did you do before?
Michael kept his eyes on the road.
Before what? Before this. Before driving. He was quiet for a moment. Not a long moment. Just a beat. The kind that most people wouldn't notice. But it was there. I drove, he said. Emily frowned. That's the same thing. Yeah. So you always just drove? Pretty much. She considered this with the gravity only a 7-year-old could bring to a non-answer, then apparently decided it was acceptable and leaned back against the seat. She looked out the window at the rain-blurred streetlights for a while. Okay, she said finally. Okay, he agreed. She was almost asleep again when she said quietly, almost to herself, I just wondered. Michael didn't respond. His jaw was tight for the next 4 blocks. There was a photograph tucked into the corner of the dashboard, small, half hidden behind the edge of the plastic trim, the kind of placement that looked accidental but wasn't. A woman laughing at something off camera, bright eyes, one hand reaching toward whoever was taking the picture like she was about to grab the lens. Emily never mentioned it. Michael never looked directly at it. But it was there every night, in the peripheral corner of every shift, present the way a scar is present. Not something you think about exactly, just something that exists in the same space as everything else. The second-to-last ride of the night dropped off at a hotel near the bridge. Michael sat for a moment in the quiet after the door closed, listening to the rain on the roof. The last ride had taken longer than expected, nearly 40 minutes across town and back. By the time Michael pulled up near the Bridge Hotel, the clock read 11:47. In the back seat, Emily had surfaced from sleep the way she sometimes did on longer stretches, not all at once, but gradually, until she was sitting up straight, watching the hotel doorman struggle with a broken umbrella through rain-blurred glass. She found this very funny. Michael allowed himself a small smile. He was about to pull away when he saw her. She came around the corner at a run. Not a jog, not a hurry, a full sprint, the kind that meant something was wrong. Dark jacket, hair soaked flat against her face, one hand clutching the strap of a bag across her chest. She wasn't looking at the street. She was looking behind her. Michael saw the 2 SUVs before she did. Black. No plates visible from this angle. Moving slowly, the kind of slow that wasn't casual, that was deliberate, like a hand closing around something. The girl made it to the edge of the curb and stopped. She looked left, looked right, looked directly at his car, the only vehicle sitting still on the block, and made a decision in about half a second. She ran straight at him. Both palms hit the passenger window hard. Her face was level with his. Up close, she was younger than he'd initially read. Mid-20s, maybe. Eyes that were scared but not panicked, which somehow made it worse. Panicked people were running on instinct. This girl was still thinking, still calculating, and she'd still run out of options. "Please," she said. A voice was muffled through the glass, but he could read it. "Just drive." Michael didn't move. He looked at her. Then he looked in the rearview mirror at the SUVs, now stopped half a block back, hazard lights off, engines running. Then he looked at Emily, who had stopped laughing at the doorman and was now watching the girl at the window with wide, still eyes. He should say no. He knew exactly what this was. He'd spent 4 years making sure he would never be anywhere near something like this again. He had a system. Keep the head down, keep the radius small, take the quiet rides, skip the drama, go home, take care of Emily, repeat. It had been working. It had been working. He looked at the girl again. She wasn't begging anymore. She'd stopped saying anything. She just stood there in the rain, hands still pressed to the glass, looking at him with the specific expression of someone who has already accepted the answer is no and is simply waiting for confirmation. Emily's voice was very quiet. "Daddy," she's scared. Michael exhaled slowly through his nose. Then he reached over and unlocked the door. She got in fast, pulled the door shut, and immediately slid low in the seat. "Don't stop," she said. "Don't look at them, just go." "I know," Michael said. He pulled out of the spot without signaling, merging into the lane at a pace that was brisk but not sharp. Nothing that would read as a reaction. The SUVs were in his mirror. They didn't move immediately. They were watching. "Left at the next intersection," the girl said. "Right," Michael said. "If we go left, we're heading toward a one-way grid. 3 blocks in, we're channeled. They know that." "What? No, left!" "If we go left, we're heading toward a one-way grid. 3 blocks in, we're channeled. They know that." A beat. "Who are you?" she said. Michael didn't answer. He took the right. The next 6 minutes were the kind that most people never experience and never forget if they do. Michael didn't speed. He didn't run lights. He didn't do anything that would register as a chase to anyone watching. And that was the point. He moved through the city the way water moves through cracks. Not forcing, just finding. Left at the intersection where one streetlight had been dead for weeks, right into a service alley barely wide enough for the car, through an underpass that navigation apps had been misrendering for years. He'd noticed it on his 3rd week driving this route and filed it away the way he filed everything away, quietly, without knowing when it would matter. He knew these streets the way a musician knows a piece they've played 10,000 times. Not consciously, not by thinking, just by knowing. The body ahead of the brain. The girl kept checking the rear window. "They're still back there." "Not for long," Michael said. He cut through a parking structure in the east entrance out the west and came out on a street 3 blocks removed from where the SUVs had last had a visual. He slowed to normal speed, turned on the radio. Something low, unremarkable. The mirror was clear. Emily, remarkably, had not made a sound throughout any of this. She was sitting very straight in the back seat, holding her jacket in her lap, watching the girl in the front seat with the careful attention she usually reserved for things she was trying to understand. The girl finally turned around to look at her. Emily looked back. "Hi," Emily said. "Hi," the girl said. Her voice had shifted. The edge was still there, but something in her had exhaled. "I'm Sophie. I'm Emily. Are you okay?" Sophie opened her mouth, closed it, looked at Michael. Then she looked back at Emily and said, "I'm working on it." The silence that followed lasted about 30 seconds before Sophie broke it. "You knew they were going to turn before they turned," she said to Michael. He kept his eyes on the road. "I know this area." "You knew which direction before they moved." "Educated guess." "That's not—" She stopped, looked at him more carefully. The way he was sitting, both hands on the wheel, posture straight but not tense, eyes moving in that specific pattern across mirrors and intersections. "You're not just a driver." Michael said nothing. The radio played something slow. Outside, the rain kept falling. The city moved around them like it always did, indifferent, continuous, full of things happening in the dark that the daylight would never know about. In the back seat, Emily had started drawing in the small notebook she kept in her bag. Her pen moved in quiet, careful strokes. Sophie watched her for a moment, then looked at the notebook. Emily had drawn a figure, a man, recognizable as her father by the simple geometry of a child's rendering. He was holding something. It was unclear what. A box, maybe, or a folder. "What's your dad holding?" Sophie asked. Emily looked up, completely unbothered. Bar said that's the before. She went back to her drawing. I'm not supposed to ask about it. Sophie turned slowly back to face the front. She looked at Michael. Michael's expression hadn't changed, but his hand, for just a moment, tightened on the wheel. Behind them, 3 miles back, a woman sat alone in a darkened office. On her screen, a paused clip, shaky footage, a car she didn't recognize. In her hand, a file with a name she hadn't heard spoken aloud in 4 years. She set it down carefully on the desk. Then she picked up her phone. The clip was 43 seconds long. Someone had filmed it from a second-floor window, probably heard the tires, looked out, started recording without thinking too much about what they were seeing. The footage was shaky, rain-streaked, shot through glass that needed cleaning. But it was clear enough. A car accelerating hard out of a parking spot. A girl in the passenger seat, head down. 2 black SUVs pulling out after it. That was all anyone actually saw. What the caption said was something else entirely. Driver kidnapped a woman, caught on camera. Look at her trying to hide. Share this. By 6 a.m., it had 4,000 views. By 8 a.m., someone had enhanced the footage, isolated the license plate, and posted it in 3 separate forums with the header, "Found him." By 9 a.m., Michael's full name was in the comments. He didn't know any of this when he woke up. He knew it approximately 11 minutes later, when his phone, a cheap prepaid he used only for the Ride app, started vibrating with notifications he hadn't set up and couldn't immediately explain. He sat on the edge of his bed and stared at the screen with the specific stillness of a man whose internal alarm system had just gone from 0 to maximum without passing through any of the steps in between. Sophie was asleep on the couch. Emily's door was still closed. He'd texted the school at 6 a.m., a family situation, Emily would be out today. The automated system had replied within minutes. Absence recorded. No questions. He was grateful for that. He didn't have answers that would have fit in an absence form. He read for 3 minutes without moving. Then he stood up, went to the kitchen, and stood at the window with a glass of water he didn't drink. The Ride app had suspended his account for review pending investigation. His rating, which he'd spent 2 years building to 4.94, was now buried under a cascade of 1-star reports filed overnight by people who had never been in his car. His profile photo, the only one he'd ever uploaded, deliberately vague, half his face in shadow, was being shared in posts that called him variously a predator, a trafficker, and a person of interest in something nobody could quite define but everyone agreed was serious. He'd worked very hard to not exist online. He'd apparently not worked hard enough. He went to the small drawer in the kitchen, the one behind the dish towels, the one Emily didn't know about, and pulled out a folder. Inside, custody documents, guardianship papers, Emily's birth certificate. A letter from a family court judge dated 3 years ago that said, in careful legal language, that Michael was Emily's sole legal guardian pending a permanent order that had never quite been finalized because the process required a stability assessment, and the assessment required a stable address, and the address had changed twice in the first year. He sat down at the kitchen table. The papers were all in order. He'd checked them 40 times. He knew they were fine. But fine and protected were 2 different things, and Michael understood, in the cold, clear way that people who have already lost something understand. That systems designed to protect children could also be used, by the right person at the right moment, to take them away. His hand, when he set the folder back on the table, was not steady. It was the first time in the entire film that it wasn't. Sophie appeared in the kitchen doorway at 9:30, still in her jacket from the night before. holding her bag across her chest, like she hadn't fully decided whether she was staying. She looked at the folder on the table. Then she looked at him. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad enough," he said. "School called." "What did they say?" "Just checking in." He said it the way you say something that means the opposite. "That's what they say before they make a report." Sophie sat down across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, a neighbor's door opened and closed. Somewhere below, a car alarm went off and then stopped. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't." "Michael, don't apologize and then keep the USB." That landed. She didn't flinch exactly, but something behind her eyes adjusted. "You want me to give it back," she said. "I want you to tell me what's actually on it." She didn't tell him everything at once. Part of that was habit. She'd spent 8 months being careful with this information, parceling it out only when she had to. Part of it was that she was still watching the window. Every few sentences, she'd stop mid-thought and look at the street below, then come back to where she was. Michael noticed. He didn't say anything about it. He just waited. First layer. She worked in data infrastructure at a company called Viridian Solutions. Mid-size, privately held, contracts with about 40 municipalities across the country for things like traffic management, public health logistics, emergency response coordination. Respectable clients, clean public record. Michael nodded. He knew the name. He didn't say so. Second layer. 8 months ago, running a routine audit, she'd found something in the outbound data logs that didn't match the client agreements. Packages of user information, health records, location histories, behavioral profiles, being compiled and transferred to third-party servers that weren't in any contract she'd been given access to. "How many records?" Michael asked. Sophie looked at the table. "The sample I could access directly. About 4 million. Sample. Yeah." He was quiet for a moment. "And the USB has logs, transfer records, timestamps, server addresses, enough to show it was systematic, not accidental." Third layer, and this was where her voice changed slightly. She hadn't reported it internally, hadn't gone to her supervisor or legal or the ethics board. She'd gone directly to the data, pulled what she could, and walked out with it. Michael looked at her. "You didn't report it?" "No." "Why not?" She met his eyes. "Because I knew who would receive the report." He held her gaze. "Who?" She didn't answer that. Not yet. Instead, she said, "I was going to a journalist, someone I trusted. Last night was supposed to be the handoff." "What happened to the journalist?" "He texted me 2 hours before, said the meeting was off, said he'd been contacted." She paused on the word, like it tasted wrong. "After that, I ran." Michael leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay? You took data you weren't authorized to take." "Yes." "That's illegal. So is selling 4 million health records to people who didn't consent." "That's not the question I'm asking." She looked at him steadily. "What's the question?" He looks back at her. "So what you're telling me is you broke the law to stop someone else from breaking the law." He wasn't asking. "And you need me to decide if that's different." The kitchen was very quiet. "I don't know," Sophie said. "I haven't figured that out yet." It was the most honest thing she'd said since she got in his car. By midday, Emily was awake, fed, and deeply suspicious of the situation in a way that only children can be. Not afraid, not demanding explanations, just watching with the focused attention of someone cataloging information for later use. She sat at the kitchen table with her notebook, while Sophie and Michael talked in lowered voices near the window. Every so often, Emily would look up, glance between them, and go back to drawing. Sophie drifted over eventually, the way adults do when they don't know what else to do with their hands, drawn toward the uncomplicated, observable activity of a child with a pen and paper. She looked at the notebook. Emily had drawn her father again, standing, facing forward. In his right hand, something rectangular, not quite a bag, not quite a box. And above his head, in the careful block letters of a second grader, the word before. "You drew your dad again," Sophie said.
Emily nodded.
"What's he holding?" Emily considered the drawing like she was seeing it fresh. "I'm not sure. I just draw it like that." "Does he ever tell you what it is?" "No." She looked up at Sophie directly. "He says some things are for remembering, and some things are for forgetting, and those are different drawers." Sophie looked over at Michael across the room. He was standing with his back to them, phone in hand, staring out the window. "Which drawer is the thing he's holding?" Sophie asked Emily. Emily thought about it very seriously. "I don't know," she said. She looked at the drawing again, then added with complete seriousness, "Maybe both." Then she flipped to a new page and started drawing something else entirely. A dog, it looked like, or possibly a horse. She hadn't decided yet. 3 miles away, on the 14th floor of a building that had no logo on the outside, Isabella Crane had been awake since 5 a.m. She was 51 floors above the problem in organizational terms, and approximately 3 feet from it in every way that actually counted. On her left monitor, the clip, paused on the frame where the car turned. A specific technique, a particular kind of evasion, a decision-making pattern she recognized the way you recognize a voice before you place the face. On her right monitor, a personnel file, 4 years old, flagged as inactive. On the desk in front of her, a report she had signed. Her name at the bottom in blue ink. Her signature, which she'd given without reading the full appendix because the full appendix had been buried in a supplementary document that was technically available, but practically invisible, and she had been busy. She had been always busy. And that was the thing she was going to have to live with. Her assistant knocked and entered without waiting. David. Efficient, loyal, and currently the only person in the building she trusted, which was a sentence that would have horrified her 5 years ago. "The board is asking for a containment strategy," he said. "They want it by end of day." What kind of containment? He was careful with his next words. "The kind that ends with the USB not existing." Isabella didn't look away from the left monitor. "Sophie," she said, mostly to herself. "You always did move faster than I told you to." David waited. "The board can wait until tomorrow," Isabella said. "They won't like that." "I know." She finally looked up. "Find the driver, before they do." "We already have a name from the find him first," she said. "And David." She looked back at the screen. "Don't tell anyone else where he is." David looked at her for a moment, the look of someone recalibrating what they thought they knew about a situation. "Understood," he said. He left. Isabella sat alone in the quiet office. On the screen, the paused frame. The car mid-turn. The decision already made. She reached out and touched the edge of the personnel file. Michael Reeves, Senior Director Data Security. Status, resigned. 4 years ago. Reason on file, personal. She closed the file. She knew what the reason actually was. She'd known for 4 years. She just hadn't been ready to do anything about it. The question was whether she was ready now. It came at 7 p.m. Not the police, not the building manager. 3 knocks. Even. patient. The kind of knock that wasn't asking permission. Michael was in the kitchen. Sophie was in the hallway. Emily had been put to bed early, and whether she was actually asleep was a question Michael had chosen not to investigate. He walked to the door. He looked through the peephole. A woman, early 50s, composed in the way that people who have been in rooms with very high stakes for a very long time learn to be composed. Not cold exactly, just still. Dark coat. Behind her, one step back and to the left, a man Michael's age, lean, watchful, the kind of stillness that wasn't passive. Her assistant, maybe, or the closest thing to one she trusted right now. Michael automatically checked the angles. Just the two of them, no one else in the hallway. She wasn't looking at the peephole, she was looking at her phone. Whatever was on the screen, she read it, then turned it face down against her palm, a deliberate motion like closing a door on something she'd already decided. She was looking down the hallway, and her expression was the expression of someone who has been dreading a conversation for 4 years and has finally arrived at it. Michael put his hand on the door handle. Behind him, he heard Sophie step into the hallway from the kitchen. He heard her stop. He heard the specific quality of silence that occurs when someone recognizes something they were not prepared to recognize. "Michael," Sophie said, very quietly. "Don't open that door." He looked back at her. Her face had changed completely. "Sophie," he said. "Who is she?" Sophie's jaw was tight. Her eyes were fixed on the door like she could see through it. "She's the reason I took the USB, she said. "That doesn't answer my question. She's my sister." 3 more knocks. The same measured patience. Michael looked at the door. Then he looked at Sophie. Then he turned the handle. Isabella stepped inside like she'd been inside before. Not this apartment specifically, but rooms like it. Rooms where people had gone to disappear. She'd seen enough of them in the past 4 years to recognize the particular quality of a life, arranged to take up as little space as possible. The minimal furniture, the absence of anything decorative except one thing. One object that the person couldn't make themselves throw away. In Michael's case, the photograph on the kitchen shelf. The woman laughing at something off camera. Isabella looked at it for exactly 1 second. Then she looked at Sophie. Neither of them spoke. It was the silence of 2 people who had said everything and nothing, who had arrived at a place past the point where words worked the way they were supposed to. Sophie stood with her arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes carrying the specific exhaustion of someone who had been angry for so long it had started to feel like a personality trait. Isabella looked at her the way you look at someone you failed. Not with guilt exactly, but with the weight of it. The kind of weight that doesn't go away because you've acknowledged it. Michael stood between them. He said, "Someone want to tell me what I'm looking at?" "She's the CEO," Sophie said, "of Viridian." "I know who she is," Michael said. That landed on Isabella. She looked at him more carefully. "You knew," she said. "The SUVs." The way they moved. 2 vehicle split pattern. One cuts ahead while one stays back. That's not hired muscle. That's trained contractors. Viridian used the same firm when I worked there. Same vehicles. Same formation. You don't forget something like that. Then you know why I'm here. I know 3 possible reasons, Michael said. I'm waiting to find out which one. Isabella looked at him for a long moment. Then she pulled out a chair from the kitchen table and sat down without being invited. Not with arrogance, but with the directness of someone who had decided that formality was a luxury they were no longer going to afford. "The people who followed Sophie last night," she said, "they weren't mine." Sophie made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Sophie," Isabella said, and her voice shifted into something quieter, something that had been worn down to its base layer. I know you don't believe me, but I need you to listen. Because the men who are in those SUVs work for Marcus Hale. And Marcus Hale has been waiting for this USB to surface for 8 months. The name hit the room like a change in air pressure. Isabella's phone buzzed on the table. She looked at the screen. Marcus Hale. The name lit up the display for 3 full seconds. Sophie saw it. Michael saw it. Isabella looked at it the way you look at something you've been expecting and have already decided about. She turned the phone face down. The buzzing stopped. Nobody commented on it. But something in the room had shifted. The answer to the question Michael had been holding since he opened the door had just become visible, without anyone saying a word. Michael sat down. It came out in the way that the truth usually does, not cleanly, not in order, but in the way that pieces fall when the structure holding them finally gives. Marcus Hale was on the board. Senior Director, 18-year tenure, the kind of presence in a company that becomes load-bearing. Everything important ran through him or around him, and the things that ran around him had a way of not lasting. He'd been the one who'd brought in the third-party data agreements. He'd been the one who'd structured them to look like standard licensing arrangements. He'd been the one, 4 years ago, who'd been in the room when Michael's wife had filed her internal report. Michael said nothing when Isabella said this, but something in his face went very still. Her accident, Isabella started, was not an accident, Michael said. He said it flat, certain. And then he stopped. He stood up from the table, not fast, not dramatic, just stood, and walked to the kitchen counter. He turned on the tap, filled a glass, stood there with his back to both of them, looking at the water. Nobody spoke. He stood there for a while, long enough that Sophie looked at Isabella, long enough that Isabella looked at the floor. Then he turned off the tap, set the glass down, turned around. His face had rearranged itself back into something controlled, but his eyes were different. The specific quality of someone who has been carrying a weight for so long they'd forgotten it was there, and someone just confirmed it was real. Isabella met his eyes. I don't have proof, she said. I want you to know that I've looked. For 4 years I have looked, and I don't have anything that would hold up. I'm not asking for proof, Michael said. I'm asking if you knew. The silence that followed was the longest in the entire film. I knew there was risk, Isabella said. I didn't know what form it would take. I didn't move fast enough. And then it was too late to move at all without... She stopped. I'm not asking you to forgive that. I'm telling you so you understand why Sophie did what she did, and why I'm here now. Sophie hadn't moved from the hallway. Her arms were still crossed. But something around her eyes had shifted. Not softened exactly, but opened. In the way that happens when you've been carrying anger as armor, and someone removes one piece of it without asking. She knew, Sophie said. She's known for months about the data. I found out because I was doing my job. She knew because someone told her directly. And she didn't. I was building a case, Isabella said. You were stalling. I was trying to do it without... Without what? Sophie's voice broke on the edge. Without it costing you anything? The kitchen held all 3 of them in its silence. Emily's bedroom door was closed. The photograph on the shelf watched the room with the permanent expression of someone who had already said everything they had to say. Michael stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the city had moved fully into the dark of late evening. Lights in the buildings across the street, a bus moving below, people visible in fragments through windows, eating, watching screens, moving through ordinary evenings in ordinary ways. The kind of life that felt, from this angle, very far away. He'd had that life. For about 8 months after he left Viridian, before everything with the custody process had settled, before Emily had started school and needed consistency, he'd had something close to ordinary. He'd built it deliberately, piece by piece, the way you reconstruct something after damage, carefully, slowly, without any confidence that it would hold. It had held for 4 years. He looked at his reflection in the window. "If I do this," he said without turning around, "if I help you go public, my name is attached to all of it. The work I did there, the security architecture I built, the fact that I knew some of what was happening and left instead of staying to fight it." "You didn't know the extent," Isabella started. "I knew enough," Michael said. "That's the part I have to live with." He turned around. "And Emily." His voice didn't change pitch, but the weight behind it did. "Whatever comes out, she's going to grow up with her father's name in the middle of something. I can't undo that. Once it's public, it's permanent." Nobody said anything. "I have one condition," he said. Isabella waited. "Before anything goes public, before any press conference, any filing, anything, Emily has a legal guardian assigned. Someone outside all of this. Someone who takes over if something happens to me." He looked at Isabella steadily. "You have lawyers. Use them. I want it done before tomorrow morning." Isabella held his gaze for a long moment. "Done," she said. Michael nodded slowly. Then he looked at Sophie. Sophie looked back at him. She'd uncrossed her arms at some point. She looked, for the first time since she'd gotten in his car, like someone who wasn't bracing for impact. "You're sure?" she said. "No," he said honestly, "but I'm doing it anyway." At 9:15, Sophie stood in Isabella's office doorway. She reached into her jacket pocket, held out the USB. Isabella looked at it for a moment before she took it. "You could have given this to anyone," Isabella said. "I know," Sophie said. "I gave it to you." Neither of them said anything else. There wasn't anything left to say that the gesture hadn't already covered. The press conference was at 10 a.m. What most people would never know, and what Isabella had never told anyone, was that she'd been preparing for it for 11 weeks. The attorneys had been on retainer since February. The journalist had been sitting on a corroborating story for 6 months, needing exactly one more source. The board members she trusted had been quietly briefed in pairs over the past 3 weeks, always in person, always without documentation. All Isabella had been waiting for was the USB. Sophie had moved faster than expected, but the infrastructure was already there. Last night had not been a beginning. It had been an ending. Michael spent the night not sleeping. He sat in the kitchen after Emily had gone back to bed, the folder of custody documents on the table in front of him, now accompanied by a newly drafted legal document that Isabella's attorney had emailed at 2 a.m. with an apologetic note about the hour. He read it 4 times. Then he signed it. Then he sat in the quiet for a while. Sophie came in at some point, made 2 cups of coffee without asking, and put one in front of him. They sat across from each other in the kitchen, the way people do when they've been through something together that they don't quite have language for yet. "Why did you actually stay in that car?" Sophie asked.
Michael looked at his coffee.
"Emily," he said. "She asked you to help, but you could have overridden that. You almost did." "Yeah. So why didn't you?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Because," he said slowly, "the last time I decided something wasn't my problem, I was right. Technically, legally, by every reasonable standard, it wasn't my problem." He looked up, and someone died. Sophie didn't say anything. "I'm not doing that again," he said. "Doesn't matter what it costs." The press conference worked the way these things work, which is to say, not cleanly. Isabella presented the evidence. First, she set something on the podium. Small, unremarkable. A USB drive in a clear evidence bag, labeled with a case number in her attorney's handwriting. She didn't explain what it was immediately. She let the cameras find it first. Let people wonder. Then she began to speak. The data transfer logs, the server records, the documented communications between Marcus Hale and the third-party buyers. She named names. She named herself as someone who had known too much for too long and hadn't moved quickly enough. That part, the self-implication, was what made the journalists lean forward. People who protect themselves in press conferences are performing. People who indict themselves are usually telling the truth. Michael wasn't in the room. He watched it on his phone, parked 2 blocks away, Emily in the back seat eating a granola bar and not asking questions. By noon, Marcus Hale's attorneys had issued a denial. By 2 p.m., 3 separate news organizations had corroborated the core data. 3 miles away, in a corner office on the 22nd floor, Marcus Hale watched the coverage on mute. He'd been on the phone for 4 hours straight. Attorneys, board allies, 2 people whose names didn't appear on any company document. One by one, the calls had stopped being returned. He set his phone down on the desk. Outside his window, the city moved the way it always moved, indifferent, continuous, unbothered by any single man's unraveling. He looked at it for a long time. Then he reached for his phone again. This time, no one picked up at all. By 4 p.m., the original clip of Michael's car, the one that had called him a kidnapper, that had broadcast his name and face to people who had decided his guilt in the time it takes to read a caption, was being reshared with new context, new captions, the algorithm pivoting with the cheerful indifference it shows toward all things, damaging and corrective alike. Michael watched the notifications change in real time. Same face, different verdict. He turned his phone face down on the seat. He'd known this would happen. He'd known his name would be clean again, technically, publicly, in the way that public opinion can be clean when the story shifts. What he hadn't fully calculated, or maybe hadn't let himself think about, was what it would feel like to have his name out there at all. Not the bad version, just out there, real, visible, attached to something. For 4 years he had been no one. Now he was someone again. He wasn't sure yet whether that was a loss or a return. Evening. Michael pulled out of the parking spot and headed back the way he'd come. Emily had finished the granola bar and was quiet in the back seat, her notebook open on her lap, her pen moving in small, careful strokes. After a while, she said, "Is it over?" "Some of it," he said. "The scary part?" He thought about that, honestly. Some of the scary part? She nodded like that was acceptable. She went back to drawing. The streets were still the same streets. The rain had stopped sometime around midday and hadn't come back. The city looked the way it always looked from inside a moving car at night, like something that contained more than you could ever see, more stories than you could ever follow, more people making impossible choices in ordinary moments than anyone was keeping count of. After a few more blocks, Emily said, without looking up, "Pa?" She only called him that when something was serious. "Yeah." "Were you scared?" He looked at her in the rearview mirror. She was still looking at her notebook, but her pen had stopped moving. "Yeah," he said. "I was scared." "Of what?" "Of losing you." She looked up then, straight at him in the mirror, the way she sometimes did, with that clear, uncomplicated directness that children have before the world teaches them to look sideways at things. "You didn't, though," she said. "No," he said. "I didn't." She went back to her drawing. A moment passed. "Daddy?" "Yeah." "Next time, can Sophie sit in the back with me?" Michael looked at her in the mirror. It was such a simple thing to ask. "Yeah," he said, after a moment. "Maybe she can." He looked back at the road. Something in his chest did the thing it always did. Tightened, then loosened, then settled. Only this time it settled somewhere different than it used to. Somewhere that felt, cautiously, like forward. The car moved through the intersection. The light ahead turned green. Michael looked at the road, not at the mirror, not at the photograph in the corner of the dashboard, just the road, just forward, just what was directly in front of him. For the first time in 4 years, that felt like enough. The city kept moving, as it always does, as it always will. If this story hit you the way it hit us writing it, give it a like and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next. Every like tells the algorithm this story is worth sharing, and stories like Michael's deserve to be seen. Drop a comment below. Would you have unlocked that door?